I've got a spine, tingling tale from a recent late-night drive that has left me questioning reality as I drove home after spending a lovely evening with my boyfriend, Mark. The winding road seemed to stretch on endlessly, surrounded by a dense forest that whispered secrets to the wind. The only solace I had was the comforting sound of my car's engine and the soft music playing on the radio. As the miles passed by, a sense of unease began to creep over me. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, as though unseen eyes were fixated on my every move. The feeling grew stronger with each passing moment, and I couldn't shake the unsettling sensation that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, the radio, which had been playing my favorite song, emitted a loud burst of static that made me jump in my seat. My heart pounded as I fumbled with the dial, trying to regain the soothing music, but instead of the familiar melody, all I heard was an unsettling white noise, punctuated by indistinguishable voices that seemed to whisper malevolently. Fear clutched at my heart as I glanced in my rearview mirror. Blue and red lights flashed behind me, casting eerie shadows in my car. Panic surged through my veins as I realized I was being pulled over by the police. I quickly slowed down, pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing. With trembling hands, I reached for my purse and began searching for my driver's license and registration. The anticipation of a police officer approaching my window was nerve-wracking. But when I finally looked in my side mirror, there was no police car behind me. Confused and terrified, I stepped out of my car, scanning the empty road for any sign of flashing lights. The night was deathly silent, the only sound being the wind rustling through the trees. My breathing came in ragged gasps as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I was certain I had seen those lights, but now there was no trace of them. As I climbed back into my car and continued my journey home, an eerie chill settled over me. The feeling of being watched persisted, intensifying with every mile. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was lurking in the darkness, just beyond my headlights. Then, without warning, the sky overhead erupted with a blinding white light, illuminating the entire area around me. I slammed on my brakes, shielding my eyes from the intense glare. When the light finally dimmed, I realized with a shock that I had lost an hour and a half of my journey. My heart raced as I struggled to understand how time could slip away so inexplicably. Tears welled up in my eyes as I continued my drive home. The road seemed endless, and my sense of dread grew with each passing moment. The feeling of being watched had transformed into a suffocating presence that seemed to envelop me. It was as if unseen eyes were boring into my soul, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something malevolent was following me. Finally, I reached my destination, my trembling hands gripping the steering wheel. As I parked my car in the driveway and rushed inside my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something sinister. The events of that night haunted me, and I couldn't explain the lost time, the strange lights, or the unsettling presence that had followed me. Exhausted and terrified, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a figment of my imagination. Have any of you experienced something this eerie on a late-night drive? I'm looking for answers, and I'm not sure if I'll ever get them. One thing's for sure, though. I won't forget that night anytime soon. Before I start, I want everyone to know that this is a true story. It haunts me to this day, and I can't escape the horrifying memories that lurk in the dark corners of my mind. It all began one fateful night when I was driving home after meeting friends at a restaurant. Little did I know that the events of that night would forever change my life. It was a late autumn evening, and a dense blanket of darkness enveloped the narrow, winding road that led to my house. The only source of illumination was my car's headlights, which carved a feeble path through the pitch black forest that flanked the road on both sides. I'd always found this stretch of the journey unsettling, but tonight it would become a nightmare. As I navigated the road, my heart pounded in my chest. The rhythmic hum of the engine was my only companion, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. It was during one of these moments, when the world seemed eerily still, that I saw it. At first, I thought it was an injured animal, lying by the side of the road. My headlights illuminated a grotesque figure, hunched over as if in pain. I couldn't ignore my instincts, so I pulled over and turned off the engine. My heart raced as I reached for my phone to call for help. But then, the unimaginable happened. The creature, which I initially mistook for an injured animal, began to stir. It rose slowly to its feet, revealing a grotesque human-like appearance. Its limbs were long and slender, and its skin appeared pale and mottled. But what truly sent shivers down my spine were its eyes. Empty, soulless orbs that stared directly into my car with an unsettling intensity. Fear gripped me, and my fingers trembled as I fumbled to restart the car. The creature's movements were unnatural, its gait jerky and unsettling. It took a slow, deliberate step toward me, and that's when I knew I had to get out of there. With trembling hands, I managed to turn the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I sped away from the nightmarish apparition that stood by the roadside. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The creature was following me. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, my heart pounding like a drum. The road twisted and turned, and the creature maintained its pursuit. Panic overwhelmed me, and I dialed 911, desperately seeking help. I explained my location and the terrifying encounter. But before I could hear a response, the call abruptly ended with a horrifying scream from the creature. I was alone on that dark road, and it felt like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The creature was relentless, and no matter how fast I drove, it stayed close behind, its grotesque form illuminated by the glow of my taillights. It was as if it defied the laws of nature, moving with an unnatural speed that sent chills down my spine. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. What was this creature? Why was it chasing me? I had so many unanswered questions, but there was no time to dwell on them. My only goal was to escape its clutches and make it home alive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the flicker of red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. Relief washed over me as I realized that a police car was approaching. I pulled over, my heart still racing, and watched as the officers stepped out of their vehicle. I explained the horrifying ordeal, but the police officers couldn't provide much information beyond the fact that something was trying to kill me. They searched the area, but found no trace of the creature. They did, however, discover a lifeless body on the road, suggesting that I might have hit someone. It was a gruesome sight, and I felt a profound sense of dread wash over me. In the following weeks, I became a prisoner of my own memories. My therapist suggested that my story might be a coping mechanism to suppress guilt for the accident, but I was convinced that I had witnessed something otherworldly, something that defied explanation. The nightmares haunted me, and I couldn't escape the feeling that the creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. Every time I drove at night, the memories came flooding back. I would glance nervously in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those unsettling eyes staring back at me. Sleepless nights and paranoia became my constant companions, and I knew that I could never truly escape the terror of that night. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I encountered something beyond our understanding, a creature that defied the laws of nature and plunged me into a never-ending nightmare. Whether it was a supernatural being or a product of my own traumatized mind, I may never know. But one thing is certain. The horrors of that night will haunt me until my dying breath. A chilling reminder that there are things in this world that defy explanation and lurk in the darkest corners of our reality. The night was a shadowy tapestry of eerie sounds and dimly lit streets as I embarked on another grueling shift at the 24-hour fast food restaurant. I was used to the graveyard shift, the peculiar blend of solitude and oddities that always seemed to accompany the late hours. Tonight, my companion was George, a lanky teenager who seemed more focused on his phone than anything else. As the minutes bled into hours, and the monotony of the late-night orders settled in, we received a call that sent shivers down my spine. A voice, gravelly and distant, ordered meals for 15 people, each word spoken with a slow deliberation that seemed to hang in the air. The order seemed peculiar, but nothing too out of the ordinary for a late-night shift. George and I prepared the bags of food, checking and double-checking to ensure everything was perfect. The address the man gave was in an old part of town, and as we punched it into the GPS, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settling in. The night was unusually dark, and the moon shrouded in thick clouds. When we arrived at the address, my apprehension grew. The house was a decrepit, looming structure, and there wasn't a single light shining through the windows. It seemed as though the place had been abandoned for years. The atmosphere was heavy with silence, save for the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. I glanced at George, and he shared my unease. We rang the doorbell, but there was no response, not even the faintest sound from inside the house. I tried calling the number the man had given us, but it went straight to voicemail, and there was no indication that it had ever been a functioning phone line. We waited in the car, our headlights casting eerie shadows on the overgrown shrubbery that surrounded the house. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. We considered leaving, but something kept us rooted to that spot. It was as if the night itself had conspired to keep us there, trapped in the sinister grip of uncertainty. Just as we were about to give up and return to the restaurant, the silence was shattered by the harsh ringing of the phone. My heart pounded in my chest as I picked up, and a chilling voice, dripping with anger and menace, seeped through the speaker.
"Where do you think you're going? You think you can just abandon me?"
The man's voice was a sinister rasp, and his words sent a shiver down my spine. "You better get back here, or I'll find you. And when I do, you won't leave this place alive." I stammered a feeble apology, not daring to hang up. The man's threats were bone, chilling, and I could feel the malevolence in his words. George's face was drained of color as he listened to the voice on the other end of the line. The man continued his tirade, promising gruesome fates and unspeakable horrors. The fear gnawed at me, paralyzing my thoughts. I knew we had to get out of there, but returning to the man's house was out of the question. I made a quick decision and hung up the phone, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. George and I exchanged terrified glances, and without another word I floored the gas pedal, leaving the ominous house behind. The relief was short-lived. As we sped away from the man's supposed lair, the night took another sinister turn. Out of nowhere, a car emerged from the darkness behind us, its headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. It tailgated us relentlessly, honking and swerving, dangerously close. Panic welled up inside me, and I urged the car to go faster, weaving through the empty streets like a madman. But the pursuer was relentless, and no matter how fast we went, they stuck to us like a shadow. And then it happened. The other car slammed into ours with a deafening crash, sending us careening into the side of the road. My vision blurred as I fought to regain control of the car, the world spinning around me. As I stumbled out of the wreckage, a figure emerged from the mangled car behind us, his face contorted in a grotesque mask of rage. He staggered toward us, bloodshot eyes fixed on George and me.
"Where's my food?"
He screamed, his voice an agonized wail. It was the man who had ordered the meals, his disheveled appearance and wild eyes confirming our worst fears. Terror seized me, and I fumbled for my phone, ready to dial 911. But before I could make the call, the man lunged at us, his fingers clawing at the air like a ravenous beast. We backed away, our hearts pounding, and I realized that there was no escape. In that moment, as the man closed in on us, I understood the true horror of the night. It wasn't the darkness or the abandoned house, but the malevolence that lurked in the hearts of those we encountered. We were trapped in a nightmare, a twisted web of fear and violence from which there was no escape. Just when it seemed like our fate was sealed, the wailing sirens of approaching police cars pierced the night. Red and blue lights painted the scene with an eerie glow, casting long, distorted shadows on the street. The man froze, his grip on us weakening as he turned to face the approaching law enforcement. A sense of relief washed over us as the police officers swarmed the area, their weapons drawn and voices stern. They quickly apprehended the man, his threats and screams falling on deaf ears as he was subdued and handcuffed. George and I stood there, gasping for breath as the police took the man away. Our hands still trembling, we recounted the bizarre and terrifying events of the night to the officers, from the strange order to the threatening phone call, and finally, the car crash. As the man was placed into the back of a police cruiser, he shot us one last venomous glare, promising revenge with his eyes. It sent a chill down my spine, a reminder that the horrors of that night were not over yet. The police assured us they would conduct a thorough investigation into the man's activities, and they took our statements before allowing us to leave the scene. We returned to the restaurant, shaken and traumatized, but grateful that we had survived the nightmarish ordeal. In the days that followed, the police discovered the truth about the man. He had a long history of mental instability and had been living in the abandoned house, disconnected from reality and consumed by his delusions. The meals he had ordered were never meant for anyone but himself, a disturbing manifestation of his twisted mind. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me, knowing that the man had fixated on us, even in his deranged state. Every night, I would lock my doors and windows, unable to escape the lingering fear that he might return to fulfill his threats.